Sonic the Continuation, Issue 20. It starts with Orbot and Cubot acting as newscasters for Mobius, which feels like a boring waste of time, even if it is trying to actually use the fact that Eggman's ruling the world again by showing what that's like. There's other things I'd rather see than a page of Orbot saying that Sonic's gone when he's not. A Badnik predicts the weather, and I wonder why Eggman bothered to have the weather reporter replaced too. It's lampshaded that this isn't worth the time and effort, and Eggman says he wants to keep the public scared and cowed. They would have remained that way anyways. He wants to get the Master Emeralds because the Chaos Emeralds alone take so long to recharge the Eclipse Cannon that he dismisses it as not being useful enough. While I like that this is different from SE2, why should he care how long it takes to charge? It worked as a way to threaten everyone into not rebelling. It doesn't really matter that people got to evacuate in time when it still scared people. And yet he still thinks that someone's going to call his bluff, which is just paranoid after his zone was destroyed to prove it wasn't a bluff. I know that in SE2, Shadow said that they need all 7 Chaos Emeralds because at this rate, the cannon will take too long to charge up. So I guess the reason he's saying that is that he thinks the cannon will always take too long to charge up, no matter how many emeralds there are in it. Maybe Shadow didn't correct him on that yet. Eggman complains that he can't invade the floating island because it vanished. He has every scope and sensor on the Ark looking for it and they've turned up nothing. If Knuckles did this, that's surprisingly smart of him. Too smart. I feel like he couldn't have done it on purpose or he would have done it before. Suddenly Eggman's told that the Freedom Fighters have emerged from portals to attack robots in 3 zones at once. I know this is meant to make them look cool, but again, why are they risking one of those zones being destroyed? If he didn't destroy those zones, he'd be making people think he isn't willing to do so anymore, because he said he'd do that because of any rebel activity. He tells Gray Aspen to get to work. Amy says she's uploading Porker's program into a main computer. Jorpheus gets attacked by Aspen, fights back with lasers in the predictable way, and Aspen says the Metrics are like Badniks too. Then Aspen gets shot from behind by flying machines from Gun. Tails uploads a message into a machine to tell people that Eggman's a liar and the Freedom Fighters are alive and well. It's nice of them to do that. But again, why is Sally telling them all to fight back when it's just gonna put their zone on his list of places to destroy? A tower gets destroyed by Shadow, who threatens the heroes and talks like a cartoon villain, talking as if giving people hope isn't good. He should have at least said, they're getting their hopes up. Amy loses contact with Tails because of the signal cutting out, and Moraine has to be sarcastic when she asks if Shadow is Tails' friend. So you'd think Tails would know that. I like that she calls Shadow's fireball magic. Finally, someone acknowledges that Chaos powers are just magic. They're all lucky Shadow didn't see the cover, which would remind them he has Chaos Control, so he could freeze time and defeat all of them effortlessly. And it's very convenient that he always forgets that. Tails hovers in place, avoiding Shadow's fireball. Good thing STC explained that Tails is a fast flyer, so it could be assumed that he's fast enough to deal with Shadow. He distracts Shadow, and Moraine cuts him from behind with a sword in a shocking moment. Then she says a cool taunt, which puts her at risk by taunting him instead of continuing to try to attack him. He gets surrounded in pink fire. Moraine at least stopped running at him and used the Chaos Blast. How would they survive this? Other than having rings, nothing would keep that pink fire from destroying them if it hit them. I guess Shadow didn't do this earlier because he was arrogant. Amy warns everyone to fall back to their extraction point and retreat. I really wish IDW Amy had her hairstyle. I know it's a superficial thing, but I can accept her being a leader perfectly fine here. I've got no problem taking her seriously. Sure, it's not a pretty looking hairstyle, but that establishes that she cares more about being a leader fighting Eggman than her looks. And out of nowhere, the Goblin Queen goes in front of a seemingly unbeatable enemy with a weapon and tells the heroes to get to safety. That's surprisingly admirable of her. How am I supposed to know how to pronounce that name of hers? It'd be easier to call her Gwen. it's hard to tell who that person in silhouette is. I had to read the comments to find out it was Grimer. Why couldn't it have been more clear? He recognizes her even though we never saw him in the Nameless Zone. So either he visited it for fun, or he's from there, which is acceptable because he looks so weird. But Nigel Kitchen explained that he doesn't think of them as an alien. It'd be nice to finally have an explanation for why he looks so out of place on Mobius. I can't believe SCC Online never explained that, or gave any backstory at all. I don't think it's a goblin because he doesn't look like one SCC, and foxes live in the Nameless Zone too, so there could be tons of different species of people there. Grimer recognizes the portal to the Nameless Zone and figures out that's where the Freedom Fighters went and wonders how, and sees this as an opportunity. Shortfuse goes through the portal to Amy. Grimer wishes he'd given Gunn more warning and says they were so low on pilots that he had to jump in the cockpit of one of its machines. And he lampshades that being on the front line isn't like him. He explains that he doesn't like it, which explains why it's rare. Gwen starts making an unsympathetic looking complaint. She should have known what was going to happen. Then Grimer greets her politely and says shockingly that the body he gave her is still holding up well. It's smart of him to remind her of what she owes him. She calls him her father. Good response, Shortfuse. Body I gave you implies that he isn't literally her biological father, or even just a scientific creation of his, because that's an awkward, stilted way to talk if all he's referring to is that he's the reason she exists. Even if he just made her body and transferred her to it, he still doesn't count if her actual soul didn't come about because of him. She has pointy ears and he doesn't, so clearly he's not a goblin, or at least not a full-blooded one. But her mother is. It's sweet to see his expression and stuff. It's about time I see a moment like this from him. It comes out of nowhere, but at least they both have green skin, so it's trying as hard as it can to look believable right away. I still want to know why he ever knew to leave the Nameless Zone and find out about Robotnik in the first place though, because you'd think if he was born there he would have never left and met him. And he would have used his technology to make it a technological marvel instead of it being stuck in medieval times. So why doesn't he just visited the place? Maybe it would make sense if he somehow failed to take over the place, or committed some other crime, and so he doesn't live there anymore because he's hiding from the law. Naturally, Shortfuse asks how Grimer's her father, naturally having a hard time believing he could get that lucky. Instead of clearing up the confusion right away, he just says he's not giving him the talk. An impressively amusing line. Amy's smart enough to tell Shortfuse that now's not the time to focus on that, and she wonders where Tails is. The story ends with Tails bruised in front of Eggman. And there's actually a line below this page that says Daddy Goblin, which confirms that Grimer is meant to be a goblin. Well, alright, I'll accept that because he's got green skin like she does. We don't know how goblins actually would be if they were to exist, so I guess I can't say that it makes no sense that he's a goblin despite not having pointed ears. And this is a fan comic after all that already had the guts to have Sonic X characters in it, so it's established that it's not trying to be an exact continuation of SCC anyways. But there's still part of me that finds it confusing because I'm remembering how the previous goblin leader before Gwen looked in Sonic the Comic itself. The goblins before that weren't green, and much uglier in the way their heads were shaped. Maybe pointy ears aren't something every goblin has after all, because it's more like whether your earlobes hang low or not. Or, he doesn't entirely resemble a goblin because he's only half goblin. That'd be way more believable. The idea that he wasn't living anywhere on Mobius until Robotnik took it over is a much needed explanation for why he showed no sign of being there until he took it over, because it explains why he never took over Mobius before he even turned into Eggman. He joined Robotnik after he took over the worlds because it was much easier to just join him than try to conquer a world himself, which I know he'd still try to do because the Metallix had still been made in an alternate timeline where Kintapor didn't become Robotnik, so it's clear he would have started trying to conquer Mobius eventually. And most likely he joined Eggman because he had the same goal and knew it'd be easier to join him than compete with him. Which especially makes sense if he failed to try to conquer one place. What's really made this weird at first is that at no point did Tails say or think in the STC that Grimer is a goblin. But that's also justified because we never saw the point where he first saw Grimer where he would have had that thought, which he'd keep to himself to avoid revealing where he came from. And he wouldn't have a reason to say or think that he's a goblin a second time, as that'd just be stating the obvious to such an extent that even he wouldn't bother. And I don't think it was like him to constantly think of a goblin as, ugh, that ugly goblin. Knuckles met goblins too, and we never saw him point out in even a thought bubble that Grimer looks like one of those goblins. But it could make sense because the next time he saw him, he would have been more focused on the situation than on remembering and pointlessly stating the obvious. Or he could have just assumed that somewhere on Mobius, there's people that look like Grimer, who just coincidentally resemble goblins, which is what everybody assumed before. And it's not like we see Knuckles' every waking moment, so we were bound to miss a moment where he reflected on what Grimer's appearance meant about him. The fact remains, that moment would have been shown if the writers of SEC wanted to reveal Grimer was a goblin. But instead they never seemed to care what he was. But that's lazy compared to this. Bottom line is, while it seems weird that this tells us that Grimer was a goblin all along, because we all assumed he was a green human, it's just believable enough. And I'm just happy that he finally has a backstory. Well, he doesn't need that more than he needs an explanation for what those things on his back are, but at least I can assume they're life support technology and shrug it off. I can't wait to find out how he met her mother and why he didn't make the Nameless Zone a technological marvel. It's like he didn't have the confidence to take over a planet like Robotnik would if he's doing it by himself. But he always acted so confident that I never got that impression. Sonic the Continuation, Issue 21. Amy and her friends run through a portal and immediately find Kintobor with Grimer. So why did they know to spawn the portal here? Shortfuse immediately knows this is a Kintobor computer, even though his so-called genius took a bit to figure it out. Right away we see why Kintobor having a body is a great thing, because he gets to put his hand on Amy's back, and she gets to have her hand on his shoulder. Techno's amazed by what she already assumes is a robot body and can't wait to find out how it works. Grimer says they have a lot to discuss, and thankfully he's not mistreated yet by the heroes in the next panel. Romantic and Sonya hear Kintobor tell Amy about the hedgehog extermination program, causing them to protect as many hedgehogs as they can down here. Amy's shocked with Sally having her hand on her shoulder and says Robotnik wouldn't go that far, when she had no reason to give him the benefit of the doubt on anything. It'd make more sense for her to assume that he was too lazy to do that. It goes to show you that it's justified to write Eggman doing this, even if people would have this reaction how dark it is. That and it's the only excuse they could have for gathering Sonic's siblings in one place where he might be able to meet them, that wouldn't rely on just coincidence for them finding each other. The only reason Amy would say this is that it's confusing that he took so long to do this. Shadow's a hedgehog too, but I figure that if he knows about this, he doesn't care because he's the exception and he assumes he'll always be because he's working for Eggman. And that's a good assumption because it'd be insanely stupid of Eggman to try to exterminate someone so useful to him. I've always assumed that Tails isn't the only fox on Mobius, because otherwise everyone would have been questioning him and treating him differently. It would be obvious that he's from another universe. Why didn't he start a fox extermination program too? Maybe he did. Kintobor apologizes to Amy, and it's confusing to see the brown hedgehog who's yelling at Amy because he looks exactly like Sonic used to, but with blue eyes. He wonders where the Freedom Fighters were to stop this from happening. I can't help but find it satisfying that he says, "You think a little radio broadcast fixed anything?" Exactly! He says the heroes abandoned them to Robotnik. They didn't on purpose, but they did in a way by moving to the Nameless Zone. But he shouldn't ignore the fact that they couldn't get everyone there. He's either smart enough to know Sonic's gotta be alive, or most people aren't aware that he supposedly got blasted to death. Shortfuse corrects them, and the human says Sonic attacked their military because the SE2 framing thing happens. Amy instantly sides with Sonic, assuming he was framed, of course. Kintobor is smart enough to tell them to stop bickering because they don't have time to waste. It's annoying that Grimer says the heroes let people down, but at the same time it's cathartic because he's right, and the guy who used to be their enemy is the perfect character to be written to be snarky and call them out on their failures. Why would he bother being gentle with them when he'd know they'll always hate him? So he just wants to relieve stress. But I still love Kintobor's line. "Oh, thank you, Grimer, that really diffuses the situation." Then Amy gets contacted by Rouge and Tikal, who Grimer considers to be their infiltration team. It's cool to see them so confident. I really love that it's being different from the game. The writer takes the extra effort of having Rouge say she's scrambling the signal through several relay points to disguise it. Tikal gets asked if she's okay, and Rouge makes me wish she explained how she got to the Ark, because she's got no reason not to. I assume it's the same way. Kintabor takes off his hat to be humble and says it's about time they know the truth about the Ark and him, even though he just said a page ago, we don't have time for this. Logically speaking, it's dumb for him to decide to tell him something he's ashamed of when he doesn't have to. He just wants to stop holding it inside so it won't bother him anymore, trust them not to hate him or act on it. He explains that long ago, the Kintabor family developed insanely futuristic technology because they're fictional characters. I love that they're called a clan just for an Archie reference, even though there's no other human families around called clans here, as far as we know. The Kintabor family opened a gateway to Mobius. It sure is convenient, or rather inconvenient, that Mobius of all planets in that particular universe was the one they opened a portal to. But this was basically always canon to SEC anyways, because why else did Kintabor get to Mobius? I love that he's in a sort of hazmat suit here. It makes sense of them to take a precaution and have a spacesuit. The Ark was made for the humans to study Mobius in secret. They crafted it into the moon of the planet itself. I'm really loving that's not like the game. I can't tell you how boring it is that so many continuities have the adventure games adapted into them and barely do anything new, when this is how it should have been handled. Kintabor was born on the Ark, and Techno's annoyed at Kintabor for not telling them about the place, even though he had no reason to before. I'm glad Amy sides with him, saying that they all have their secrets, reminding her of Tails' secret. Unfortunately, Kintabor doesn't know why the Eclipse cannon was built because the person he was based on was only a boy when he migrated to the surface. Out of nowhere, the former gun commander shows up and says he was fired, but not for the Brutus incident, surprisingly. Instead, it was for Eggman stealing the Ark access codes from him. That's not fair. I don't remember it being his fault that happened. It's creative that Alexander Tower has a new name in this, Victor. And Kintabor already knows his name because Ovi Kintabor did. I like that Rouge has a new outfit, and that her sister is part of the infiltration crew, along with Victor. Surprisingly, this page came out before Rouge's sister got returned to normal and turtle power. Grimer asks Victor what he has to report from the Ark, and he says it's just as they were smart enough to suspect. Eggman's making robots, like he doesn't have enough of those. He had enough to take over the world. They're given all of the exposition, and I don't know why Rouge is smiling when saying that people are trapped on the Ark. I don't know why Grimer thinks the idea of them being experimented on is amusing either. Then we see Cubot wanting Tails to tell him stuff while Tails is trapped against a wall. The joke is that Cubot isn't normally intimidating, so him punching someone would still hurt more than a normal punch. Tails just thinks it's silly that they're trying to do a good cop, bad cop routine on him. I guess he's just judging them as harmless based on how small they are. But it's a bit arbitrary because he just met them, and he's seen tons of dangerous badniks their size. They can shoot lasers for all he knows. Cubot says he drew the straw to get the bad cop and says the portal stunt of the heroes was cool. This is unusually ineffectual of Fleetway Eggman. That all they're doing is politely requesting information from him. Impressively, Eggman actually knows that Tails will never give up information. He says the portal suggests the Freedom Fighters are hiding in another dimension. And he says he has to scan Tails for particles that tell him where in the multiverse he's been. So that's cool. I guess he's measuring the atomic vibrational frequencies of the atoms in him. He hasn't seen this sort of particle trace before and says he needs more data. That sure is convenient. It's not like he scanned them before and is comparing the two sets of data. Cosmo's shown giving first aid to Moraine, though I can hardly tell it's her. Moraine says Tails won't break because he's the champion of the Nameless Zone, and because the glass can be heard through, this tells Shadow which zone the heroes have been hiding people in. That still doesn't tell him the exact atomic vibrational frequency of the place. But Moraine's scan data would. So if she gets kidnapped, Eggman would be able to get that data. And I guess the idea is he's able to make a portal to any dimension he wants if he has the data. It's just believable enough that Moraine said this, even if Cosmo could have easily not said what she ended up responding to. Shadow holds a sword and breaks it to scare Moraine, and gets told off by the robot nurse that it was childish to do that. I assume because it wasted a perfectly good weapon someone else could use. He says his injury is taking longer to heal than before, and gets told that he should have let her treat it instead of having the idiot bolt. He wonders why she's been following him around all day, when anybody would assume it's because Eggman wants him supervised and he's injured. She makes me wonder if she got a crush on him somehow. And she explains that no one else here is going to keep him functional, and Eggman still needs him, but is too lazy to look after him. Shadow lampshades the idea of one of Eggman's own creations insulting him. Nikki says she's smart with a personality to better do complicated tasks. That doesn't require an outright personality with opinions, just the ability to perform a skill. She has free thought, but isn't able to disobey Eggman. But Mecha Sally didn't hate Eggman, so why does she? So Shadow remembers Maria saying they don't have to do what they're told by someone. Aw, I was hoping that Maria wasn't a part of his backstory in this comic, because he was acting more evil than ever. But there's still creativity there as long as she's talking about jailed Robotnik and not a soldier threatening her. And it's also creative that she even has rebellion at all. So he warps away from her. Techno raises a good point, asking Grimer why he didn't tell Robotnik about the Nameless Zone, because if he did, he would have conquered it. I don't know why Grimer is acting like he did tell him about it. It's frustrating that he doesn't answer a question. Why is she even asking him? The only answer he could give her that I can think of is that he thought Mobians deserved to suffer under Robotnik's rule, but not his own people. So, apparently he always knew that Robotnik would suck to live under as a ruler, and he was just sadistic. That's a lot more believable than what I assumed. That he did think he was a good ruler. Techno should know that. After all, Grimer chose to work for Robotnik. Kintabor asks someone how they got his phone number and says Amy has somewhere else to be because Chuck wants her to see him, although he calls him Charlie. That's exciting, and I'm wondering what took him so long. I guess he only wanted to call her after Sonic was conscious. I guess Amy didn't have enough time to tell Kintabor what Chuck helped her with as basic conversation about their lives. Why did Kintabor wonder how Chuck got his number? I was told Chuck had been giving Kintabor intel when Eggman was in power. Why would he change the number? And apparently Chuck wants to surprise Amy. So that's why Kintabor doesn't just tell her why she needs to go to him instead of annoying her. Chuck doesn't know where Amy is, so he has to get her to come pick Sonic up to reunite them. Sally puts her hand on Amy's shoulder and tells her she'll handle the mission for her, so finally she'll get more time in the sun. Why doesn't Amy have faith in her when she wasn't incompetent in their adventure with Chuck's drone? Even though she didn't do anything memorable either. The pacing would have been faster if she agreed to trust her instantly. And Techno's gonna go with Amy as well, because they're best friends. I guess Grimer's only rude to the heroes for stress relief purely because they still hate him. I have to say that because it's not really smart of him. Grimer would hear Shortfuse and Kintabor planning to send Porker to spy on him. I guess he doesn't care. This makes me assume he doesn't have an evil plan in the Nameless Zone. I hate it when a text bubble isn't close enough to someone and not directly connected to them, so it's harder for me to tell who's talking. And I just think I'm assuming that the leftmost one is Shortfuse. Amy says good luck as the story ends. This issue by Okuda was about the freedom fighters sending a message out to the people of Mobius to rebel against Eggman while seeming to forget that he destroyed the first zone that did, and this message provokes Shadow into attacking the heroes. Eventually he ends up beating Tails in a fight and delivering them to Eggman, all because they wasted their time. I wonder why if he's so evil he doesn't just use Chaos Control or his super speed to instantly kill every enemy he's got. Maybe he thought Eggman wanted Tails alive to be used as a badnik. And same goes for every other enemy he's got. I just wish that was explained. So that makes more sense than SA2 where he and Eggman had no excuse to not decide to do that. Also, Shadow's tragic backstory could give him the kind of anger issues that make him merely want to fight with his fists to vent out his pent-up anger. The interesting part of the story was the revelation that not only does Grimer recognize Gwen in the portal to the Nameless Zone, but she thinks of him as her father. And I already talked about that. This story was about the heroes being given exposition. Did anything really happen in this story? I mean, did we really need to see the reactions of the characters to the exposition? Amy and her friends find Tinty Boy with Grimer. And they talk a lot. That's it.